Hey there, all you beautiful souls. I hope your day has been absolutely fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you back for yet another exciting episode of What If Naruto Was Transported Back in Time. Don't forget to pay a visit to the author of this captivating fanfiction and show them some love. You'll find the link waiting for you down in the description. If this what if is sparking your curiosity, drop a comment down below and share your thoughts. And while you're at it, don't miss out on exploring the plethora of other intriguing what ifs available on this very channel. Alright, let's not keep you waiting any longer, let's dive right into this thought-provoking video. Hyuga Hinata quietly entered the semi-darkened room and knelt next to the futon lying at the far side. Her eyes silently searched the sweat-drenched face of the woman lying before her, as her fingers brushed a strand of wet hair away from the woman's face. As she hadn't had a specific purpose for entering the room, she might have allowed herself to cry, even if her father would have frowned upon such shameful weakness. Her sensei had always been so beautiful, so strong, and so confident, everything Hinata was not, and now all she could do was lie there, too weak and full of sedating pain medicine, to even remain awake for more than a few minutes at a time. Hinata carefully lifted the thick blanket covering the dark-haired Jonin, and examined the Kurenai's bandages. She hadn't quite bled through them this time, thankfully, which meant that the wound was healing. Hinata slowly peeled away the bandages, and then began to lightly dab a warm damp cloth against the edges of the long gash in Kurenai's side, trying not to disturb the stitches or the clotted blood any more than was necessary to make sure everything was clean and free of infection. Even in the dim light, the wound was horrifying to see. A nasty red, swollen line that cut its way about 6 centimeters into Kurenai's side, passing between her 10th and 11th ribs, and going all the way through to her back. It looked almost as though someone had tried to cut her in half, which was exactly what had happened. Crisscrossing the wound were poorly done black stitches that Hinata had been forced to hastily sew into her mentor's side to save her life. Hinata was not a skilled medic nin, in fact, she was little more than a novice. A more skilled medic nin might have been able to heal the Jonin, and leave only a faint scar if any behind. Because Kurenai had only Hinata to heal her, she would likely be left with a very large and very ugly scar, marring her once perfect skin. The thought that she was once again failing Kurenai made Hinata want to throw up. She had always known that she was not a good ninja, but she never thought that she would hold her teammates back this badly. Kurenai was hurt, their mission was in jeopardy, and all Hinata could do was sit in the darkened room and go over the events that had led them to this point in her mind, picking out each and every point where she had failed. 3 days ago. As teammates cautiously made their way into the small fishing village of Genoza, Hinata couldn't help but be amazed at the changes a few days had made. They'd started off their mission under blue skies with sparrows and robins singing happily as they soared overhead, while Orochimaru yipped and barked playfully. It had been such a nice day that Hinata had almost been able to put her encounter with Naruto behind her, and simply enjoy the peacefulness of the journey. So nice was it, in fact, that she'd eventually decided that when she returned to Konohagakure, she would find Naruto and apologize for her rudeness to him, even if it was his rudeness that had made her angry in the first place. He wasn't, after all, very socially astute, and probably hadn't even realized that he'd hurt her when he laughed about her mother's death, though it seemed that even he should have known how unkind it was. Maybe, if she was feeling particularly brave after completing the mission, she would even tell him what he had done to anger her, but probably not. The fact that he had come looking for her meant that he most likely didn't know he'd hurt her, and that was enough for her to forgive him. She'd never been good at staying mad at anyone, and he was still too important to her not to eventually forgive him. Then, on their second day of travel, things had changed. They'd been ambushed by 2 ninja wearing strange clawed gloves with a large chain connecting them. The ninja had immediately gone after Kurenai, who easily avoided their attack, and called for her team to protect Suzuna. In the struggle, most of Team 8 handled themselves exceptionally. Kiba and Akamaru successfully knocked one of the 2 ninja away, and then Akamaru had urinated on the ninja while he was down. Shino's bugs surrounded and confused the other ninja, while several of them began to drain the man's chakra. All Hinata managed to do was move in front of Tazuna, but she was too frightened at that point to be much more than a shield for their client. Before it came to that, Kurenai took care of the 2 enemy ninja. She simply stepped in front of them, her fingers forming seals faster than Hinata could see, and then the enemies were on the ground, and the fight was over. Hinata knew what genjutsu was, she'd even had it cast on her a few times by both Kurenai and other instructors at the academy, but it was still impressive to see 2 full-grown ninja taken out so easily. After their attackers were tied up, Kurenai had confronted Tazuna about the true nature of their mission, and he had eventually confessed that he was more worried about ninja attacks than random robbers. He explained that his country was poor and controlled by a man named Gato, who ran a shipping company known throughout the world as Gato Company. Gato controlled them through intimidation, violence, and because the only way to and from the wave country was by boat, and Gato owned all of the large boats. Tazuna was a bridge builder and had been working for several years on a bridge that would connect the wave country to the mainland. Kurenai had originally felt that they should return to Konoha and get reinforcements, but was convinced by Kiba and, to a much smaller extent, Hinata, that they should continue on. Shino chiming in that they would technically be going back on the contract, which was to escort Tazuna back to his home, seemed to settle the matter. They had continued on, but Hinata and the rest of the group had immediately felt the change in the mission. What had once felt like a nice walk along a road that was so infrequently used that most bandits didn't bother with it, was suddenly far more serious and frightening, at least to Hinata. Now that they were in Genoza, things seemed to be getting even worse. Perhaps it was the fog that had rolled in from the sea, or maybe it was the fact that there seemed to be almost no citizens in the village, or that those few villagers that they saw moved as quietly as possible, and didn't look up at the newcomers, but they could all feel a sense of foreboding hanging over them. Tazuna quickly led them to a small dock where a friend of his was working on a net next to a long, thin fishing boat. The bridge builder and his friend had a hushed conversation that seemed to be filled with a lot of pleading and arguing, but eventually they all climbed into the boat and headed out to sea. Kurenai had never been a big fan of boats, so she was almost thankful for the danger hanging over them. That gave her something else to worry about. It wasn't that she was scared exactly, she could swim just fine and could walk on water even better. She just preferred to have her feet on solid ground, rather than thinking about the fact that there was only a thin layer of wood separating her from the inky darkness of the watery depths. She was almost thankful for the danger, but not quite. Had she been alone or with a more experienced team, she wouldn't have been concerned, but her team was far too young to be thrown into the mess they now found themselves in. She wished for the 100th time since the two masked ninjas' attack that she had been born with less of a heart. She'd given in to Kiba's complaining and pleading back in Konoha and let her team take a mission it probably wasn't totally ready for, and then had let the boy talk her into continuing with the mission, once it proved even more dangerous than she'd originally thought, though Hinata's quiet voicing of her opinion that they could not abandon Tazuna-sen had probably been the deciding factor that time. It was just so hard to say no to any of her genin, but to say it to Hinata was nearly impossible. When Shino had also spoken up in favor of continuing in his calm, logical voice, there was almost no way to deny their request. If only it were possible for them to get through the rest of the mission without running into any more trouble, or at least without running into any more powerful trouble. Her team had actually handled themselves surprisingly well in their first real combat, but if they faced anything more than a couple of overconfident Chunin, they wouldn't come out of the encounter unscathed again. There were a few other genin teams that might be up for the challenge, but not any of the current crop of rookies. Maidogai's team had Hyuga Neji, who was rumored to be a genius of nearly unrivaled potential, even among the Hyuga, and with their added experience, they could probably have handled the mission. But even Guy, with all of his eccentricities, would have thought twice about allowing his team to attempt a B-rank mission. If it turned into an A-rank mission, he would no doubt refuse outright. She was also certain Asuma wouldn't have allowed his team to attempt such a mission, so why was she? Kurenai knew the answer, or at least part of the answer, and it worried her. She was letting them do it so that her team, particularly Hinata, would have something to be really proud of, a way of setting them apart from the other teams. Kakashi's team had, well, Kakashi, a near-living legend, as well as Sasuke from that clan. Asuma's group was the second incarnation of the great Ino Shikacho team, on top of having the son of the third Hokage as the team leader. What did her team have? Hinata, the heir the Hyugas didn't want, Kiba, a good ninja from a fairly notable clan, but not one of the elites, Shino, another member of a small, though proud, clan who had as much skill and potential as anyone, but wouldn't be noticed because he was so quiet, and herself a woman who had only just recently become a jonin, and given her own team. They had nothing to be ashamed of course, but they didn't really stand out as being a team filled with talent. The only way her team could stand out any less, at least in terms of potential, would be if Uzumaki Naruto were on it, and at least he was someone of note in the village, though not necessarily in a good way. She hoped her actual reasoning had been more due to the fact that her team still wanted to complete the mission, and because Tazuna and his village were poor and needed help, but she couldn't deny that a part of her wanted her team to show what they were made of, and get a moment to shine in the spotlight. Ugh, this mist is annoying. Kiba groaned from the front of the boat, where he was squinting in a futile attempt to see where they were going. We should see the bridge soon, Kaji, the boat operator informed them as he patiently worked his single oar, to keep them on a path that only he could see. He was a thin, malnourished-looking man with the weather-beaten skin of a lifelong fisherman. The worry and fear etched in his long face showed that he was regretting ever agreeing to help them, and probably had been from the moment he nodded his head. The wave country is at the base of the bridge. The whole team turned and looked forward, straining their eyes in an attempt to catch a glimpse of the bridge. The Akugin, Kurenai heard Hinata whisper, and then the small girl gasped in shock. A second later the bridge appeared from within the mist, so close they could almost have reached out and touched it. Holy shit. It's huge. Kiba yelled with a laugh. You're amazing old. Shut up. Kaji hissed in alarm. Why the hell do you think we're hiding in the mist and not using the motor? We'll be in deep trouble if Gato finds us. Kiba slapped his hands over his mouth, the noise of the action echoing off the pillars of the bridge, and sounding far louder than it should have, and nodded quickly. Shino raised an eyebrow at the man's obvious panic, but didn't comment, while Hinata continued to stare up at the immense bridge. Gato was one of the few extremely rich men in the world who wasn't a daimyo. Kurenai had heard of him before, but only in reference to Gato Company, which upon becoming its president and renaming it he had turned into the continent's leading shipping company, in the span of just a few short years. According to Tazuna, that company was only a front to a much larger business which specialized in drug and black market trafficking, as well as in terrorizing smaller towns and countries to bring them under his power. Tazuna claimed that Gato came to the wave country about a year ago, and through bribery, buyouts, and violence took over the country's shipping industry, giving him a stranglehold on all commerce coming in and out of the small island. With the completion of the bridge, however, all of that would change, which was why Tazuna's life was in danger. A few minutes later, the boat slipped silently out of the mist, and Kurenai and her team got their first view of the small dilapidated-looking village situated at the edge of the island. Even from the distance, Kurenai could see why Tazuna had been unable to afford a B-rank mission. The less they were investing their money into other areas, the villagers probably didn't have 2 coins to rub together, let alone enough to purchase the services of high-ranking ninja. We'll be there soon, but Tazuna, I'm going to take the route that has the most vegetation, Kaji whispered. It doesn't look like we've been detected yet, but I don't want to take any chances. That's a super good idea, Tazuna smiled, the sight of his bridge warming his heart and leaving him feeling as though the hard part of the trip was already over. Kaji steered the boat through a narrow— This is it for me, Kaji told them as he pulled his oar from the water, daring to bring his voice to just above a whisper, but only just. Goodbye and good luck. Yeah, Tazuna replied, super thanks. Kaji did not respond. He quickly stored the oar, gave the pull crank a quick tug to start the engine, and then sped away from the village as fast as possible. Kurenai's team and Tazuna watched him go for a moment, and then the old man turned to the teens and their leader, and grinned cheerfully. Okay. Get me home safely, he ordered as though it would be as simple as walking down the path. Kurenai could only hope that things ended up going that smoothly, but if a man with Gato's resources wanted Tazuna dead, he wouldn't stop with just sending a few chunin after him. Kiba, you and Akamaru are up front, Hinata, take the back, Shino, you and I are in the middle with Tazuna. Her red eyes glanced around quickly, and she could feel her pulse quickening. She had a bad feeling about all of this. Let's hurry. They only made it a short ways before Akamaru gave a bark and dove into the bushes. What happened? Kurenai asked as Kiba stared in surprise at the spot his companion had vanished into. I don't know, Kiba replied. He just said he smelled something and took off. The young ninja carefully stepped over to the bushes and pulled them apart to reveal the white puppy pinning a white snow rabbit to the ground with his mouth around its neck. The rabbit did not dare to struggle, hoping that the puppy would find a stationary object less appetizing than one that wiggled in his mouth. Every second or two, Akamaru would give a muffled little growl and shake his head back and forth, trying to elicit a reaction from his prey. Ah, Akamaru, let it go, Kiba moaned. I'll feed you when we get to the old man's house. Besides, that thing looks way too skinny to be any good anyway. Akamaru whined mournfully as he opened his mouth and released the white rabbit, which instantly bolted for a small bush and vanished. I don't care what you thought you smelled, it was just a rabbit, Kiba sighed, but despite his words, he gave a long thoughtful look at the spot the rabbit had disappeared. Hey, Tazuna-san, he asked as he and Akamaru once again took point and the group began to walk again. Does it snow here often? In the winter it gets super cold and snows, but we're a long ways away from that time of year, the bridge builder replied with a shrug. Do people keep rabbits for pets or something? Kid, if someone is lucky enough to catch a rabbit, they eat it. There's not enough money for all the people to eat, they aren't going to waste any on feeding a rabbit. Then why was that rabbit still white? Kiba asked as they rounded a corner and a large lake came into view. Should it be a different color? Tazuna asked in confusion. I'm interested in bridges, not rodents. It's late spring, a snow rabbit should have turned brown by now, Kiba replied. Kurenai had only been loosely paying attention to the conversation up until the point, but something about Kiba's words got her attention and had her on guard. Hinata, she said in a calm voice that belied her inner concern, activate your Byakugan and take a look around for me. Hinata started to do as she was asked, but before she could activate her Kekkei Genkai, Kurenai heard something moving through the air and leaped at the Hyuga, tackling her to the ground as she called out, everyone get down. Shino reacted instantly, grabbing Tazuna by his backpack and jerking him to the ground as he also dropped. Kiba had been too caught up in the mystery of the rabbit and reacted slowly, but was saved by Akamaru diving at his knees and knocking him to the ground, as a large object passed overhead and thudded against a nearby tree trunk. When the danger was past, Kurenai looked up and saw a tall, thin man standing on the handle of the largest sanbato she had ever seen. The blade was at least 140 centimeters long and close to 60 centimeters wide, and was buried over halfway into the tree trunk it had collided with. It must have taken an incredible amount of strength just to lift it, let alone throw it. The man wore grey-blue pinstripe pants and camouflage arm coverings, but no shirt, so they could see the greyish-colored skin of his back. His hit sat haphazardly on the side of his head, and a dark blue-colored strap presumably for his sword came up from his pants and wrapped around his neck. His mouth, nose and the lower half of his head were covered by white bandages, and a shock of short brown hair covered his head. He turned slightly, and Kurenai caught a glimpse of a slash through the mist symbol of KyLewin. "You're the ones who defeated the demon brothers?" the man asked incredulously, the couple of brats and the little woman. Kurenai rose to her feet, glancing around quickly to make sure that no one on her team was injured. "Who are you?" she asked the man. He smirked and turned fully to look at her, squatting down on his sword so that he could be ready to move in an instant. "That's my line. Yuhi Kurenai of Konoha." Never heard of you. You're not in my bingo book." His eyes shifted away from her dismissively and locked onto Tazuna. "I'm Mamachi Zabuza. I'm here for the geezer." Kiba jumped to his feet and glared at Zabuza. "Like hell you're laying one finger on old man Tazuna." He yelled defiantly as Akamaru barked in agreement. "Is it a hit I ate on your head, boy?" Zabuza asked, his eyes never leaving Tazuna. "You think that makes you a ninja? You don't know what a real ninja is. Protect Tazuna-san." Kurenai ordered as she placed herself between Zabuza and Tazuna. Her team quickly obeyed, forming a tight triangle around the bridge builder. Her heart was pounding in her ears, and she could feel sweat trickling down the side of her face. She didn't know much about him, but she'd heard of Mamachi Zabuza, and that was enough to scare her. Being a fairly new jonin, Kurenai had only recently received a bingo book of her own that listed and had information on all of the dangerous or noteworthy ninja from other villages, so that a jonin or Onbu member would know what they were up against. She didn't remember reading about Mamachi Zabuza, however, which meant that she had heard his name elsewhere, and that meant that he was either a very dangerous individual, or had done something big enough to be discussed by other ninja not involved in whatever he'd done, which basically came back to him being extremely dangerous. "No matter what happens," she ordered, her red eyes trained on the tall ninja in the tree, "protect Tazuna-san and stay out of this fight." But Kurenai-sensei Hinata started to object. "No?" Kurenai yelled over her shoulder, her voice tight with fear that she wished she wasn't showing. "Stay back. If you see a chance to make a run for it, you take Tazuna and get as far away from here as you can. This one is totally different than those other guys were." Zabuza grinned through his wrapping. "You have no idea how right you are, little girl." With deliberate ease he placed one hand on the handle of the sword he was still standing on, and then gave the tree a small kick, pulling his sword free and propelling himself away from the tree and out over the lake. Teammates turned their heads towards the water and quickly located him again. It was sort of hard to miss the tall man with the enormous sword strapped to his back standing on the water, as if it were stone. Zabuza brought one hand in front of his mouth, 2 fingers pointing at the sky, and then raised his other hand, once again extending 2 fingers. For a moment Kurenai thought that his form was fading, as if he were performing some sort of invisibility jutsu, but then she realized that it was worse than that. Zabuza's jutsu was forcing a large amount of chakra into the water, causing it to evaporate and form what was essentially a small cloud around him. Zabuza grinned at them one last time and then said, "Konohagakure no jutsu." He vanished into the mist that had surrounded him, and then it began to spread outward until they too were enveloped in it. "What the hell is he?" Kiba asked nervously, his eyes shifting back and forth in a futile effort to see through the mist that had surrounded them. "The missing nin from Konohagakure," Kurenai replied, stepping a little farther into the mist, her eyes traveling back and forth as she searched for signs of movement in the vapor. "I don't know exactly who he is, but I think I've heard of him, and that's a very bad thing." The 3 genin exchanged glances, and Tazuna took a small step backwards. "They'll probably come after me first," Kurenai continued, trying to ignore their fear as well as her own. "If I survive the first attack, you need to make a break for it while I keep him busy." "If?" Hinata asked, her breathing suddenly becoming short quick gasps, as she struggled not to give in to her growing panic. Kurenai would have loved to have comforted the girl, but at the moment, she wasn't sure how and certainly couldn't spare a moment's attention. "I don't know what sort of techniques he likes to use, and I don't know how strong he is. If he's as strong as I fear, then yes, if..." She took another step forward, and the mist seemed to swell up around them until she vanished from sight. "Kurenai-sensei," Hinata called out in alarm. "She's fine," Shino told her in a calm, but strange-sounding voice. His clan prided themselves on their emotional detachment and their steadfast adherence to logic, but that did not mean that they were immune to fear. "Hey, this mist is getting thicker," Kiba groaned, his hand tightening on the handle of his kunai. "The wave country is surrounded by the ocean, so fog isn't uncommon," Tazuna whispered as the mist continued to thicken, "but I've never seen anything as super thick as this. It's hard to smell anything but dirty water," Kiba complained as he squinted his eyes, trying to force some sort of shape to emerge from the cloud in front of him. For a moment the 3 genin continued to look around, trying not to shake with fear, and then Shino whispered, "Hinata, use your Byakugan." Hinata gave a sharp nod, but before she could do as she was told, a terrifying voice echoed from within the fog. 8 vital points. Kiba swallowed hard and Akamaru whimpered and stepped back between his friend's legs. "The larynx, spine, lungs, heart, kidney, jugular vein, collarbone, and liver, which one should I go after first?" And then something even thicker and more frightening than fog descended upon the group, a bloodlust so powerful it made the 3 genin want to throw up. Kiba's head whipped back and forth nervously as his hands began to shake with fear. Shino didn't show much in terms of outward signs of fear, but it gripped him nonetheless, freezing him in his spot so that he couldn't have even lifted a finger if he dared. Hinata knew her teammates were afraid, but she was sure that it was hitting her the hardest. She felt the bile rise all the way to the top of her throat before managing to swallow it back down. And even though she managed to keep her stomach's contents where they belonged for the moment, her knees grew weak and she felt herself starting to fall to the ground. It was like something was squeezing her insides, threatening to kill her if she even moved a muscle, and yet sapping her strength and forcing her to her knees. She just wanted it to end, even if she died, even if she had to take her own life. So long as the tear, the squeezing, stopped, she didn't care how it ended. Hinata, Kurenai's reassuring voice suddenly called to her as the dark-haired Jonin stepped out of the mist. Hinata, you're okay, I'll keep you safe, I promise. Use your Byakugan. Hinata nodded weakly, forming the seal and then blinking as the veins around her eyes stretched and the world changed. The mist faded considerably for her, though the chakra in the air allowed some of it to remain, and the world became much clearer. She could see Tazuna behind and to her left, with Kiba just beyond him and Akamaru on the ground. She could see Kurenai in front of her and Shino to her immediate left, but most importantly, she could see a man patiently approaching them from straight ahead, just behind Kurenai. Kurenai-sensei. Hinata called out as the man's sword drew back for a fatal strike. Kurenai reacted instantly, spinning on her heel as her hand dipped into her kunai holster, and firing the weapon the second it was out. Hinata's white eyes whitened as the man was struck in the chest, and then seemed to melt as though he were made of water. She reported this to Kurenai, who nodded and told her to keep looking, as she made eye contact with Shino, and gave him a small hand signal. Shino never gave any sign that he'd seen the movement, but he lowered one arm and opened his hand as something fell from his sleeve. Remember what I said, Kurenai told them in a stern voice. The moment the fight really starts, you getting out of here. Hinata didn't reply, not trusting her voice, but she gave a small nod as she turned her head to make sure she was watching behind them as well. All Hyuga had a blind spot in their Byakugan's field of vision. They could see about 355 degrees around them, but not the full 360. Her father was said to have nearly 359 degrees, and her sister was estimated at a little more than 357. Hinata had overheard someone say that Neji could see even more than her father, but no one knew if that was true or simply a rumor started by branch members wanting something to hold over the main house. Hinata wasn't sure what her field of vision was, but from the way the examiners shook their heads, it must not have been very good, and on top of that she was certain that she couldn't see nearly as far as many other Hyuga could. It was yet another thing for her father to be disappointed in, but for the moment it didn't matter. So long as she kept turning her head, she could see just as far around as anyone else, and no enemy was going to attack from farther away than she could see, at least not today. Above, she called out suddenly as she finally managed to catch sight of their attacker. Kiba, Shino, and Kurenai sent kunai up at the man as he dropped on them. Kurenai's hit his chest and face, while Kiba and Shino only managed to strike his arms and stomach, but it was more than enough. The man turned to water once again, raining down upon the startled group. This is super annoying. Tazuna complained, wiping water from his face. Shut up, Kiba growled, or would you rather we just let him kill you? Tazuna promptly closed his mouth. Can you see him now, Hinata? Kurenai asked, ignoring the two. No, I'm sorry, Kurenai-sensei. Keep looking, he's here somewhere. Hinata caught sight of some chakra coils moving to her right, and turned to get a better look at them, but as she did she saw another set moving in from behind, and then another to the left of the first. There's 3 of him, she whispered urgently, pointing in their direction. Damn water clones, Kurenai muttered and then said, don't stop looking. Water clones take a lot of chakra, he can't keep making them forever. It was becoming obvious to Kurenai that they were being toyed with. Zabuza was probably stronger than she was, certainly he had all of the advantage in the mist, and on top of it all, he was fast. She couldn't say for certain, but if she had to guess, she would have figured him to be a former Anbu or whatever the hidden mist equivalent was. The only things her team had going for them was his overconfidence, Hinata's Byakugan, and the fact that he or at least his clones couldn't always see kunai coming at them through the mist. Without even one of those 3, they would already be dead. How fortunate was it that her team had been given this mission. Of all the Genin teams out there, only 2 currently had Hyuga on them. Any other team would have been killed off already, even a Chunin team might not have stood much chance. Sadly, Kurenai wasn't sure how much of a chance they stood, even with Hinata to warn them of attacks. Zabuza was beginning to use more water clones, which would both confuse Hinata, and force them to use up their kunai that much faster. How's it going, Shino? She asked tensely. They're struggling to locate their target, he replied. The water limits their tracking capabilities, but they will eventually succeed. Tell them to hurry the hell up, Kiba growled. They already understand the need for haste. Left. 3 kunai shot through the mist to the north, and the sound of sloshing water greeted their ears a second later. Ha ha ha, Zabuza's voice called out to them. Are you ready for this to be over? Or would you like to play ninja a little longer? Come on out and fight like a man. Kiba yelled back. Quit messing around in this sissy mist. You don't like it? Zabuza replied. It's my home village's signature jutsu, but perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is time to stop playing around and show you why my village is also called the Blood Mist Village. Hinata's eyes had been trying to keep track of the two Zabuzas that were currently circling them, when suddenly she lost track of one. Kurenai-sen was all she managed to get out before Zabuza appeared right in the middle of their cluster. Kurenai was already moving when Hinata began her warning, a desperate plan forming in her mind. She knew she had to put it into motion before she could think of how foolish it was. In one fluid move, she grabbed Hinata by her jacket and pulled, simultaneously pushing Tazuna and kicking at Shino and Kiba, sending all four of them flying away from the danger, but leaving herself in a bad position. Zabuza sneered through his mask as he brought his sword around, passing clean through her. And then his eyes whitened in surprise as she faded like the mist, not even leaving a drop of blood behind. The ground shifted at his feet, and he looked down in time to see a small plant push through, and then grow longer as its vines entangled him. The only blood we're going to see is yours, Kurenai whispered as a leaf of the plant opened and the upper half her body appeared, a kunai already drawn. Ninjutsu. Zabuza gasped as Kurenai's weapon streaked towards his heart. The weapon pierced his body, and his mouth fell open in surprise. Kurenai's victorious grin lasted only for a second as Zabuza turned to water and splashed down on the ground. She spun quickly, bringing her kunai up to a blocking position, but it was already too late. It's over, Zabuza hissed in her ear as his blade dug into her side. Kurenai's eyes bulged as the wave of pain washed over her, but she didn't fall. Her left hand held a kunai that was partially blocking the missing nin's attack, just enough to keep herself from suffering a mortal wound, but only just. Now that she was feeling the fruits of her labor, she decided that it had been a stupid plan, after all, but there was still a chance that would work and save the lives of her genin. She would gladly accept any amount of pain for such a reward. She opened her mouth to reply, but all that came out was a small stream of blood and an unpleasant cough. Zabuza's eyes lit up as the blood from her wound and from her mouth landed on his pants and chest. I'm disappointed, he whispered to her as he pushed harder on his sword, driving the blade deeper into her side, as well as beginning to cut through the edge of her kunai. I thought Leaf Nin were better than this. Kurenai's right hand came across her body and latched onto the handle of his sword, trying to keep him from slicing her in half. Shino. She managed to croak. A moment longer and it will be done, came the reply from the mist where the Aburam boy had been kicked to. I don't have a moment, Kurenai groaned as Zabuza pressed harder, proving that both her hand and her kunai would not be able to hold him off for long. Suddenly, from the opposite direction as Shino's voice, a growl was heard as a large shape charged at Zabuza from within the mist. The ninja saw Kiba coming, however, and with a contemptuous snort, he kicked him away savagely. Idiot, did you think I'd forgotten where you were? He asked as Kiba vanished once again into the mist, landing with a loud thud. He turned his attention back to Kurenai and smiled, goodbye, little girl. The second Kiba had appeared, this one holding a kunai in either hand which he drove into Zabuza's shoulder and side as he landed on the man's back. H growled savagely as he twisted the two knives hard. Who's the idiot now? Kiba taunted with a fanged grin. This is for kicking my dog. Zabuza seemed momentarily stunned, but then he took one hand off the handle of his sword, reached back, pulled Kiba off of his back and threw him towards the lake. You're dying next, he promised as he turned back to Kurenai, and you're dying right now. He once again went to push the blade into her, this time not planning on stopping until he was watching her innards slop onto the muddy ground, but suddenly found himself feeling dizzy and weak. Wah. Kurenai looked up at him and smiled as she began to push the sword out of her side. You look like you're running low on chakra, she whispered through the pain. In the next life, make sure your enemy doesn't let you hit her to bring you out of hiding. He gave her a confused look, staring right into her eyes, and then she faded away as a nearby tree reached out with its branches and grabbed hold of him. His trunk opened up, and the branches began to pull him inside. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't find the strength to break free from its grasp, and soon the trunk was closing in around him. His sword was ripped from his hand, and then the darkness swallowed him up. Kurenai pushed until at last the sword was removed from her side, and then she collapsed to the ground, hitting just a moment after Zabuza. Every breath she took was agony, and her vision swam before her eyes as warm blood pooled beneath her. The mist around them quickly vanished with Zabuza out of commission, but Kurenai couldn't see any better than she had when completely surrounded by it. Hinata, Kiba, Shino, she called out weakly. Kurenai-sensei. Hinata yelled as she and her teammates ran towards their fallen teacher. To Kurenai it sounded as if the Hyuga was speaking from very far away through a tunnel. Hinata stripped out of her jacket and quickly cut the sleeves off of it before rolling it and placing it under Kurenai's head. One sleeve was folded once and then pressed against the gaping wound in the woman's side, as Hinata began to stutter out nervous instructions to Kiba to hold the makeshift bandage in place with as much pressure as possible, until she could get something more permanent. Shino, Kurenai whispered weakly as the world began to fade to black. Save your breath, sensei, Shino replied. You were victorious, just concentrate on surviving now. She gave a tiny shake of her head. No, she whispered, if I lose consciousness or, she took a deep painful breath, and Kiba gasped as blood began to soak all the way through the thick folded sleeve. The genjutsu won't hold him, you have to finish him. Shino nodded and picked up the kunai Kurenai had used to block the sword as he rose to his feet and walked to the fallen mist ninja. His Kakeicha bugs, which were still draining Zabuza's chakra, received his command to leave the man, and quickly made their way up his sleeves and into his body to rest and digest their meal. His glasses reflected in the sunlight as he raised the blade over his head and began to bring it down towards the man's throat. Just before he got there, however, two senbon whistled through the air and pierced Zabuza's throat. Instantly on guard, Shino spun to face the potential enemy, and found himself looking at a rather small person. The gender was impossible to guess, standing in a tree, wearing a peculiar mask and a loose-fitting outfit that seemed out of place on a ninja. Thank you, the masked ninja said in a soft voice. We've been looking for him for a long time. Who are you? Shino asked. I am a hunter nin from Konohagakure, Zabuza-san's home village. I've been after him for many months now, but have never gotten the chance to kill him until today. The small ninja vanished in a swirl of leaves and appeared next to Shino, to whom he or she bowed. Shino nodded in reply and knelt next to Zabuza, feeling for a pulse, but finding none. He is dead, Shino reported loudly enough for Kiba, Hinata, and Tazuna to hear. The hunter nin turned and looked at the spot where Kurenai was lying. Your companion is hurt, do you need assistance? I am not very good at healing, but I will help if I can. After all, it is thanks to you that I am able to return to my home again. Hinata? Shino asked. Hinata's Byakugana eyes scanned her teacher for a moment before she replied. I think I'll have Kurenai-sensei stable in a moment, but we need to get her someplace warm and dry, quickly. The hunter nin bowed once again. Very well, again you have my thanks. Now if you will excuse me, this body carries many secrets, I must dispose of it. The ninja threw Zabuza's limp arm over his shoulder, and then said, farewell, and vanished in another swirl of leaves. The stage just gets weirder and weirder, Kiba muttered from Kurenai's side. Shino looked thoughtfully at the spot where the hunter nin and Zabuza's body had vanished and then said, Kiba, help me build Kurenai-sensei a stretcher. We need to make haste to Tazuna-sen's home. A short while later, teammate limped into the village in apparent safety. When they arrived at Tazuna's house, they were greeted by his daughter, who immediately helped them get Kurenai inside and set up a futon for her to lay on while she recovered. Medicine was brought to help fight infection, bandages were set out, and food was prepared for those who were able to eat. Hinata had ignored her hunger while she quickly worked to save her teacher's life, stitching the wound together as neatly as her trembling hands would allow. Later, when it was apparent that all they could do was wait and see if Kurenai would make it, she still could not bring herself to eat. The rest of that day and through the night she waited by Kurenai's side, changing bandages, dabbing away sweat and apologizing quietly for not seeing the attack sooner, and for being so useless. If Kurenai heard her or even cared, she gave no sign of it. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.